In March 2026, over 200 United States service members filed formal complaints regarding the language their commanders used to describe the war with Iran. These briefings positioned the conflict within a narrative of total apocalypse. Department of Defense leadership, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, openly adopted the language of holy war, publicly praying for overwhelming violence and divine wrath against America's enemies. According to the leaked complaints, one line circulated through the ranks with alarming frequency: Jesus has anointed President Trump to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. This rhetoric stems from a specific theological framework, Christian Zionism. Its core premise is that the modern state of Israel is central to biblical prophecy, and that political developments in the Middle East are required steps in a predestined sequence of end-times events. This belief system operates as a massive political apparatus. Organizations tied to this movement channel hundreds of millions of evangelical dollars into Israeli settlements each year and actively shape a highly aggressive United States foreign policy in the region. But a dissident researcher named Rich Tidwell has constructed a rigid mathematical counter-theology. Using data and strict scriptural chronology, Tidwell argues that Christian Zionists are engineering a premature catastrophe. If his data-driven model holds true, United States military policy is actively financing the biblical Antichrist. The entire eschatological structure relies on a single demographic assumption: that the Jewish populations currently occupying the region are the direct descendants of the biblical Israelites. A 2020 archaeogenetic study published in the journal Cell provides a complex counter-narrative. Researchers mapped the genomic history of the Bronze Age southern Levant by extracting DNA from 93 ancient bodies recovered across multiple Levantine archaeological sites. Cross-referencing them with modern populations, the study concluded that Ashkenazi groups share more than half of their ancestry with ancient Canaanites. Tidwell uses these findings to form the Edomite hypothesis, mapping this data onto the Genesis genealogies. The biblical Israelites descend from Shem. By contrast, Canaanites and Edomites trace to Ham, aligning current Jerusalem inhabitants with the Canaanite lineage. Tidwell identifies this group as the subject of the warning found in Revelation 3:9, which describes those who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. He terms this an imposter demographic. This demographic is crucial for the final prophetic trigger, the construction of the third temple on the Temple Mount, built to house the Antichrist. By ignoring this genetic history, Christian Zionists are unknowingly financing the exact geopolitical infrastructure required by the apocalyptic villain they believe they are standing against. This counter-theology extends beyond genetic geography and into chronological mathematics. Tidwell treats the prophecies of Daniel as a rigid, formulaic rule set. This illustrates the baseline framework, the Adamic Calendar. It maps a strict 7,000-year span of human history, beginning with year 1, or 3700 BC. The calendar pivots exactly 3,700 years later, anchoring Christ's first advent to 1 BC. From here, Tidwell introduces a mathematical variable from Daniel chapter 8, a highly specific 2,300-year period describing the trampling of the sanctuary. When the model adds Daniel's 2,300-year variable to the 1 BC pivot point, it calculates the exact delay between the first and second coming, terminating precisely at year 6,000, or 2,300 AD, marking the millennial kingdom. However, a prerequisite event immediately precedes this date, Daniel's 70th week, a 7-year tribulation. The model deducts those 7 years to pinpoint the exact arrival of the Antichrist in the year 2023. In Tidwell's exegetical model, eschatology operates on an unyielding mathematical countdown. It terminates precisely in the 23rd century, immune to human intervention. This rigid timeline forces us out of theological abstraction and back into the live geopolitical reality of the 2026 war with Iran. When we place the current conflict on this schedule, we hit the year 2026. There is a massive chronological void between the present day and the eschatological trigger point. These events are occurring 267 years early. This exposes a core paradox. If the timeline is mathematically bound to the 24th century, then current efforts by Christian nationalists to trigger Armageddon are mathematically incompatible with their own scriptures. Yet, military strikes on Iranian infrastructure and ongoing regional escalations are being actively framed by defense leadership as the opening salvos of a biblical timeline. This is the concept of pushing the clock. It is the assumption by politicians and generals that they can force heaven's hand through overwhelming violence. A person can reject Tidwell's exact math, but the deeper premise holds: human bloodshed cannot accelerate a divine schedule. The United States military is manually engineering an artificial apocalypse, acting on a timeline that ignores the very scriptures they cite as justification. Tidwell's counter-theology leaves Christian Zionism defending a precarious position. By his calculations, they are funding the wrong genetic demographic and fighting the wrong war, centuries too soon. Prophetic language functions as a mechanism within modern warfare, regardless of whether the underlying theology is accurate. Scriptural language acts as a moral anesthetic. By invoking sacred territory and end times timelines, mass civilian casualties and the destabilization of entire regions become easier to excuse. This framework normalizes escalation. It creates an environment where diplomatic caution is viewed as spiritual weakness, and total war is viewed as divine purpose. When human beings use theology to romanticize war in a nuclear age, they cease to be observers of destiny. They become the architects of their own destruction.